Hey everyone, tonight you slowly drift into the warm, dusty glow of ancient Rome, where the streets hum gently beneath your sandals and the air carries the scent of baked bread, olive oil, and something faintly smoky you can't quite identify. You're not a general, not a senator, not even particularly important, and honestly, that's probably a good thing. Because as impressive as Rome may be, you quickly realize you probably wouldn't last a week here without complaining about the lack of Wi-Fi and iced coffee. In fact, you might make it about 3 hours before asking where the nearest air conditioning unit is and receiving a very puzzled look in return. So, before settling in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I create here. And if you feel like it, leave a comment sharing where you're listening from and what time it is for you. There's something oddly comforting about imagining all of us scattered across the world, quietly drifting off together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's gently ease into tonight's journey. You step forward, and the city unfolds around you like a slow-moving current. The stones beneath your feet are uneven, worn smooth by countless footsteps over generations. There's no rush here, not in the way you're used to. No notifications buzzing, no clocks demanding your attention every second. Just people, moving, talking, working, living. A donkey passes by, pulling a small cart filled with clay pots. Its pace is slow, almost meditative. You instinctively step aside, though it doesn't seem particularly concerned about your presence. Around you, voices blend into a soft murmur. Latin words you don't quite understand, yet somehow they feel familiar, like a melody you've heard before but can't quite place. This is Rome. Not the Rome of grand speeches and dramatic battles, but the quieter version, where most people are simply trying to make it through the day. And as you walk, you begin to notice something interesting. The jobs. Not the flashy ones that history books focus on, but the small, steady roles that keep everything running. The kind of work that doesn't bring fame, but might actually make life here surprisingly comfortable. You pass a man carrying 2 large clay containers hanging from a wooden pole across his shoulders. His steps are careful, balanced. Water, you realize. He's delivering water from a public fountain to homes that can afford the service. It's strangely calming to watch. No frantic rushing, no stress in his posture, just a rhythm, step, shift, breathe. If this were today, you might call it a core workout. And pay money for it at a gym. Here, it's simply Tuesday. Historians agree that many Romans relied on public fountains for daily water, especially in crowded districts where private plumbing wasn't available. But what's less commonly known is that water carriers often developed regular routes and relationships with their customers, becoming familiar faces in the neighborhood, almost like a slow, ancient version of your local delivery driver. And honestly, they probably had better work-life balance than most modern delivery apps. You keep walking. A small stall appears ahead with a man arranging loaves of bread on a wooden table. The smell reaches you first. Warm, slightly sweet, comforting in a way that feels almost unfair. You weren't hungry a moment ago, but now you definitely are. He doesn't shout or advertise loudly. He simply stands there, occasionally adjusting the bread, occasionally exchanging a few quiet words with passers-by. It's not about urgency. It's about presence. Bread, after all, is essential. In fact, one of the most well-known aspects of Roman life was the distribution of grain to citizens, part of what later became known as bread and circuses. It's a phrase still used today, usually when discussing distractions and politics. But standing here, watching this baker gently brush flour from his hands, it doesn't feel like a grand political strategy. It feels like survival, made gentle. And here's something you might not expect. Roman bread was sometimes stamped with marks identifying the baker or the batch, almost like an ancient brand logo. So yes, even 2,000 years ago, people were quietly building their personal brand, just with fewer hashtags. You move on, more slowly now. The street narrows slightly, and the shade from nearby buildings cools the air. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the soft trickle of water, steady, quiet. Maybe a fountain, maybe something else. A group of children passes by, laughing, their voices light and carefree. One of them carries a small wax tablet, its surface marked with faint writing. School, perhaps, or practice. It's easy to forget that even in ancient Rome, people had homework. Some things truly never change, unfortunately. Historians still debate how widespread formal education was among ordinary Romans, especially outside wealthy families. But evidence suggests that basic literacy, at least enough for simple reading and writing, was more common than you might expect. Which means somewhere, right now, a Roman child is probably sighing dramatically while copying lines, just like students do today. You pass another figure, this one older, seated quietly near the edge of the street. He's repairing something, a sandal, perhaps. His hands move slowly but with confidence, as if they've performed the same motion thousands of times. There's something deeply calming about it. No rush to finish, no pressing deadline, just the quiet satisfaction of repairing what's worn. It's easy to imagine how a job like this could feel stable, predictable, maybe even comforting in its repetition. In a world without constant digital noise, the rhythm of simple work might have been its own kind of peace. Though, to be fair, your back might strongly disagree after a few hours of sitting on a wooden stool. You glance down at your own feet, instinctively checking your shoes. Still intact. Modern manufacturing wins this round, but as you continue walking, something shifts. You begin to understand that the best jobs here aren't necessarily the ones with status. They're the ones with rhythm, with routine, with just enough purpose to carry you through the day without overwhelming you. And maybe that's why this all feels so strangely soothing. No endless emails, no urgent meetings, no mysterious calendar invites that could have been a message. Just work that fits quietly into the flow of life. Ahead, the street opens up slightly, and you catch sight of something brighter, a wider space, perhaps a small square. There's movement there, but it's not chaotic, more like a slow gathering. You take a few more steps toward it, feeling the gentle warmth of the sun return to your skin, and as you move forward, you begin to wonder. If you had to choose, if you truly had to live here, what kind of job would suit you best? Something active, like that water carrier? Something steady, like the sandal repairer? Or something else entirely, something you haven't encountered yet? The city, it seems, offers plenty of possibilities. And just ahead, another quiet role is waiting to be discovered. You drift a little closer to the soft sound of water you noticed earlier, and now it reveals itself, a public fountain, carved from pale stone, its surface smoothed by years of hands, jars, and quiet conversations. The water flows steadily from a worn spout, catching the light in gentle, shifting patterns. It's not dramatic. It doesn't need to be. It's reliable. And in a city like Rome, that makes it quietly important. And standing nearby, adjusting the weight across his shoulders, is the man you noticed before, the water carrier. You watch as he lowers his wooden yoke with a careful exhale, the two clay containers on either side settling with a faint, hollow sound. There's no hurry in his movements, no urgency, just a practiced rhythm, like someone who has done this every day for longer than he can remember. You step a little closer, not too close, just enough to observe, and for a moment you imagine what it might feel like to do this job. Your morning would likely begin early, before the streets fully awaken. The air would be cooler then, the kind of cool that fades quickly once the sun decides to make itself known. You'd arrive at a fountain like this, perhaps exchanging a few quiet nods with other early risers. No need for long conversations, just a shared understanding. The day is beginning. Historians widely agree that although Rome had impressive aqueduct systems bringing water into the city, not every home had direct access. Public fountains like this were essential, and water carriers played a key role in bridging that gap, delivering water to households willing to pay for convenience. But here's a detail that doesn't always make it into textbooks. Many water carriers developed regular clients and predictable routes, creating a kind of slow, dependable network. Not unlike your modern delivery subscriptions, just with fewer emails reminding you that your hydration plan is about to renew. The man beside you lifts one of the containers, dipping it carefully into the flowing water. You notice how deliberate he is. No splashing, no wasted movement. It's almost graceful. You imagine trying it yourself. At first, you'd probably struggle. The balance alone would feel unfamiliar, the weight uneven. You might take a few steps and immediately regret every life choice that led you here. Your shoulders would protest. Your arms would question your loyalty. And somewhere in the distance, a Roman citizen would watch you wobble slightly and think, "Ah, a beginner." But over time, you'd adjust. Your steps would grow steadier, your posture more aligned. The yoke would settle into a familiar place across your shoulders, no longer an intrusion, but part of your routine. There's something oddly satisfying about that idea, your body learning the rhythm of the work, your mind settling into the repetition. Carry, walk, deliver, repeat. No inbox, no meetings that could have been messages. Just a clear, simple objective. Get the water where it needs to go. And honestly, that's quite appealing. The carrier lifts the yoke again, the container's now full. He pauses for a brief moment, not out of exhaustion, but as if checking something internal. Balance, perhaps, or habit. Then he begins to walk. You fall into step behind him, keeping a respectful distance. The path he takes isn't random. There's a quiet logic to it. Turns made without hesitation, pauses at familiar doorways. At one house, he stops and gently lowers the containers. A woman steps out, exchanging a few words you can't quite catch. There's no bargaining, no confusion. This has been arranged long before today. He pours the water into a waiting vessel, the sound soft and steady. The woman nods, perhaps offering a coin, perhaps just acknowledgement. It's a small interaction, but it feels complete. You realize something then. This job isn't just about carrying water, it's about being expected. In a world without constant updates and notifications, being part of someone's daily routine, knowing they're waiting for you, trusting you to arrive, that's a kind of stability that's hard to replicate today. Though, to be fair, if you were late, there's no "sorry for the delay, traffic was bad" text message. Just a disappointed look and possibly a very dry household. You continue following as he moves on to the next stop. The sun is a little higher now, warming the tops of buildings, casting longer shadows across the street. You can feel the temperature shifting. Not dramatically, but enough to remind you that this job has its challenges. Carrying water in the heat of a Roman afternoon? That's less peaceful routine and more accidental fitness program you didn't sign up for. Still, there's a steadiness to it. Historians still debate how physically demanding this role was compared to other forms of labor in ancient Rome. Some argue that the consistent load and long distances made it quite strenuous, while others suggest that experienced carriers developed techniques to reduce strain. Either way, your modern shoulders are quietly hoping you never have to find out firsthand. As the carrier makes his final delivery on this stretch, he pauses again, setting the containers down in the shade. For a moment he simply stands there, breathing evenly, watching the street as it continues its slow, steady rhythm, and you find yourself doing the same. There's something calming about being part of a system that doesn't rush you. A job that requires effort, yes, but not constant urgency, not endless multitasking, just presence. You realize that if you lived here, this might not be such a bad way to spend your days. Predictable, physical, quietly essential. And as the carrier lifts his yoke once more and turns down another street, you let your attention drift elsewhere. Because just beyond the fountain, carried on a different current of sound and smell, something else is waiting. A faint sizzle, a hint of spices, the unmistakable pull of food being prepared nearby, and suddenly your focus shifts. Because if there's one job in ancient Rome that might rival the calm rhythm of carrying water, it's the simple, satisfying life of feeding people. You follow the scent before you even realize you've chosen to. It drifts through the air in gentle waves, warm bread, a hint of herbs, something lightly charred in a way that feels intentional rather than accidental. It's the kind of smell that quietly reshapes your priorities. A moment ago you were reflecting on the philosophy of water delivery, and now you're thinking quite seriously about food. Just ahead the street opens slightly and you see it. A modest food stall, nothing elaborate. A wooden counter, a small clay oven built into the side, and a man working with calm efficiency behind it. No dramatic gestures, no raised voice, just a steady rhythm of preparation. You slow your pace. This is Roman street food, not the polished, curated version you might imagine, but something more grounded, more real. Meals for people who don't have the time, or perhaps the means, to cook at home. In fact, historians widely agree that many urban Romans depended heavily on street vendors and small eateries known as thermopolia, especially those living in cramped apartments without proper kitchens. which, if you think about it, makes ancient Rome feel remarkably like a city full of permanent takeout orders. You move a little closer to the stall, watching as the vendor carefully slices a piece of bread. His movements are precise, unhurried. He adds a layer of something, perhaps cheese, perhaps a spread of crushed olives or herbs, then a drizzle of oil. Simple, efficient, somehow perfect. You imagine yourself in his place. Your day would likely begin before sunrise, preparing ingredients while the city still rests, grinding grains, mixing dough, setting up your stall piece by piece. There's something almost meditative about that quiet beginning. The world not quite awake yet, the air still cool, your hands moving through familiar motions. Of course, there's also the small detail that you'd have to wake up very early. And if you're anything like most people today, that alone might be enough to rule out this job immediately. But let's assume for a moment that you manage it. As the morning unfolds, people begin to pass by. Workers, travellers, neighbours. Some stop, some continue on. There's no aggressive sales pitch, no limited time offer signs, just the quiet understanding that food will be ready when they are. And over time you'd start to recognise familiar faces. The man who always orders the same thing, the woman who prefers a little extra oil, the child who lingers just a second longer, watching the preparation with quiet curiosity. It becomes a pattern, a rhythm, and like the water carrier, you become part of people's daily routines, not in a grand or celebrated way, but in a steady, dependable one. Here's something you might not expect. Archaeological discoveries in places like Pompeii have uncovered actual thermopolia counters with built-in jars, dolia, used to store hot food. Some even still contain traces of ingredients like lentils, meats, and spices. It's a small detail, but it makes everything feel closer somehow. Less like distant history, more like a paused moment. You watch as the vendor hands a piece of bread to a customer who nods in quiet appreciation before moving on. No lingering, no elaborate exchange, just a simple interaction that fits seamlessly into the flow of the day. You imagine trying to multitask here, checking your phone, answering messages, scrolling through something unnecessary, and it feels almost absurd. There's no space for that kind of distraction, just the task in front of you. Bread, oil, motion, repeat. Though to be fair, if someone asked for extra customization, you might instinctively look around for a touchscreen menu that definitely isn't there. The vendor turns slightly, adjusting something in the small oven. A faint crackle of heat escapes, carrying that comforting, slightly smoky scent. You notice how he doesn't rush. He waits, observes, knows when it's ready without relying on a timer. That kind of instinct doesn't come quickly. It's built over time, through repetition, through small mistakes, through quiet learning. And there's something deeply satisfying about that. The idea that your skill isn't measured by speed alone, but by consistency, by knowing your craft so well that you move through it almost without thinking. Historians still debate how varied Roman street food truly was, whether vendors offered a wide range of options or focused on a few staples. But evidence suggests that while there was some variety, simplicity remained essential. You weren't choosing from dozens of variations, you were choosing something reliable, something familiar, which honestly might be a relief. No endless scrolling, no decision fatigue, just food. You lean lightly against a nearby wall, letting the scene settle around you, the soft murmur of conversation, the occasional clink of pottery, the steady rhythm of the vendor's movements. It's not silent, but it's calm. And you realize something. This job, simple as it may seem, offers a kind of immediate satisfaction that's hard to find elsewhere. You make something, you hand it to someone, they eat it. The result is instant, tangible. No waiting for feedback, no wondering if your message was received, no vague, we'll circle back on this. Just done. Of course, it comes with challenges, long hours on your feet, the heat of the oven, the unpredictability of customers, and the occasional risk of running out of ingredients at exactly the wrong moment, which, judging by human nature, would almost certainly happen right when the longest line appears. Some things, it seems, never change. But still, there's a certain charm to it, a quiet pride in feeding people. The vendor finishes another preparation, briefly wiping his hands on a cloth. For a moment he pauses, not from exhaustion, but as if simply existing within the space he's created. The stall, the food, the rhythm, it all feels complete. And you find yourself wondering if, in another time, this might have been your place too. Standing here, preparing something simple, becoming part of the slow, steady heartbeat of the city. You take one last look at the stall before stepping away, letting the scent fade gently behind you. Because just beyond this corner, carried on a different kind of warmth, not from fire but from water and steam, another role is waiting. And this one might be the most relaxing of all. You follow the warmth this time, not the kind that comes from fire and food, but something softer, heavier in the air. It wraps around you as you turn the corner, carrying with it a faint echo of voices, splashing water, and the low hum of conversation that never quite rises above a murmur. And then you see it, a bathhouse. From the outside, it doesn't look especially striking, just another stone building among many, but as you step inside, the world shifts. The light softens. The sounds change. Everything feels slower. This is one of the most recognizable parts of Roman daily life. Public baths weren't just about getting clean, they were social spaces, places to relax, talk, think, and simply exist for a while. Historians widely agree that bathhouses were central to Roman culture, used by people across different social classes, though not always at the same time or in the same way. But you're not here as a visitor. You're here as someone who works quietly behind the scenes, a bathhouse attendant. You pause near the entrance, letting your eyes adjust to the dimmer interior. The air is warm, pleasant at first, though you suspect it might feel very different after a few hours. Steam drifts lazily upward, softening the edges of everything it touches. There's a rhythm here. Not loud, not hurried, just steady. You imagine your role in this space. You wouldn't be rushing between tasks or juggling a dozen responsibilities at once. Instead, your work would unfold in small, manageable pieces. Tending to the rooms, keeping things in order, making sure the water flows where it should. It's not glamorous, but it's calm. You move deeper inside, passing through a sequence of rooms. The first is cooler, a place where visitors arrive and prepare, then warmer still. Each space has its own purpose, its own pace. This sequence, the frigidarium, tepidarium, and caldarium, is well known to historians. The progression from cool to hot wasn't just about comfort. It was a structured experience, almost ritualistic in its predictability, and your job would be to maintain that experience. You notice another attendant nearby, carefully adjusting something along the wall, perhaps a vent or an opening that controls the flow of heat. His movements are slow, precise. He doesn't rush, because rushing would only disrupt the balance. It's a quiet kind of responsibility. Too much heat, and the room becomes uncomfortable. Too little, and the entire rhythm of the bath is disrupted. You're not just managing a task, you're maintaining an atmosphere. Which, if you think about it, is a bit like trying to set the perfect room temperature today. Except there's no thermostat, and you can't just tap your phone and hope for the best. You'd have to know, truly know. You walk past a small pool where a few bathers sit, their voices low, almost blending into the gentle echo of water against stone. No one is in a hurry. No one is checking the time. Because, quite simply, there isn't much reason to. Bathing here is part of the day, not something squeezed into it. Historians still debate exactly how long Romans typically spent in bathhouses. Some suggest it could be hours, while others believe shorter visits were more common depending on social status and schedule. Either way, it wasn't rushed, and that changes everything. As an attendant, your work would reflect that pace. You wouldn't be moving from one urgent task to another. Instead, you'd move slowly through the space, adjusting, cleaning, observing. There's a tool in your hand now, a simple cloth perhaps, or a small scraper used to keep surfaces clear. You wipe along the edge of a bench, the motion repetitive, but oddly satisfying. There's no pressure to finish quickly, just the quiet knowledge that this is part of keeping the space functional. And there's something else. You'd grow used to the heat. At first, it might feel overwhelming. The caldarium, the hottest room, would test your patience. The air thick, almost heavy. But over time, your body would adapt. You'd learn where to stand, when to step away, how to pace yourself. Though, admittedly, you might still occasionally wonder why anyone thought turning a building into a giant steam room was a good idea. You move into another chamber, where a faint trickle of water echoes more clearly. The light here reflects off the surface of a pool, creating soft patterns on the walls. It's peaceful. almost hypnotic. And you realize that this job isn't just about maintaining the baths, it's about existing within them, being part of a space designed for relaxation, even if you're working within it. There are worse places to spend your day. No loud machinery, no constant interruptions, just warmth, water, and the steady rhythm of people coming and going. Of course, it's not perfect. There are tasks that aren't quite as pleasant: cleaning, maintaining, dealing with the occasional mess left behind by someone who clearly forgot basic manners. Even in ancient Rome, it seems, shared spaces came with shared challenges. Some things truly never change, but even those moments are absorbed into the overall rhythm. Nothing lingers, nothing overwhelms. You glance toward the entrance again, watching as a few new visitors step inside, their movements slow as they adjust to the shift in atmosphere. You remember that feeling, the moment of transition from the outside world into this softer, quieter space. And you realize you're part of that transition now. Your work helps create it, that sense of calm, that gentle slowing down. It doesn't come from one grand action. It comes from 100 small ones, adjusting heat, cleaning surfaces, maintaining order, quiet contributions. You take a slow breath, the warm air filling your lungs. It's not the crisp, fresh air you might prefer, but it carries its own kind of comfort. And as you move through the bathhouse once more, checking, adjusting, existing within the rhythm, you begin to understand why this might be one of the more desirable roles in the city. Not because it's easy, but because it's steady. And in a world that rarely stops moving, that might be exactly what you'd want. Eventually, you make your way back toward the entrance, the cooler air greeting you like a gentle reset. The sounds of the street begin to filter in again, faint but familiar. You step outside, the sunlight briefly brighter than you remember. And just like that, you're back in the flow of the city. But now your pace has changed. Slightly slower, slightly softer. And as you continue walking, leaving the warmth behind, something else catches your attention. Not a scent this time, not heat, but quiet. A different kind of quiet. The kind that comes from stillness, from careful thought, from rows of something waiting patiently to be read. And without quite deciding to, you begin to follow it. You follow that quiet almost instinctively, as if the city itself is gently guiding you away from noise and towards something softer. The sounds of the street fade slightly behind you, not disappearing, just becoming distant, like a conversation in another room. Ahead, a doorway stands open. Nothing grand. No elaborate carvings or towering columns, just a simple entrance, shaded from the sun. And inside, stillness. You step in. The temperature shifts first, cooler, calmer. Then the scent reaches you. It's subtle, dry, a blend of parchment, wood, and faint traces of ink. Not overwhelming, just present enough to settle into your senses. This is a place of storage, of knowledge, of patience, a library, or something close to one. Ancient Rome didn't have libraries exactly like the ones you might imagine today. No endless rows of printed books neatly arranged on shelves. Instead, knowledge lived in scrolls, carefully rolled and stored in niches along the walls. Historians widely agree that both public and private libraries existed in Rome, especially among the wealthy and educated, though access and usage varied depending on status. But regardless of scale, someone had to care for all of this. And that someone could be you. You take a few slow steps forward, your sandals making the faintest sound against the floor. It almost feels wrong to be loud here, even though no one has asked you to be quiet. The space itself seems to expect it. A man stands nearby, gently unrolling a scroll on a wooden table. His movements are precise, almost careful to the point of reverence. He reads a line, pauses, then rolls it back slightly, as if ensuring everything is aligned just right. This is the rhythm of the place. Slow, intentional. You imagine your role here. A keeper of scrolls, not rushing, not juggling endless tasks, just tending to the quiet organization of knowledge, making sure each scroll is properly stored, protected from damage, and ready when needed. There's something deeply calming about that idea. You wouldn't be lifting heavy loads or standing in the heat all day. Instead, your work would consist of small, deliberate actions. Rolling, placing, checking, maintaining. Though to be fair, if you dropped a scroll and it unraveled dramatically across the floor, you might experience the ancient Roman version of a minor workplace crisis. You move closer to the wall, where cylindrical compartments hold neatly rolled scrolls. Some are labelled small tags indicating their contents. Others remain anonymous, their knowledge hidden until someone takes the time to open them. And that's part of the appeal. Nothing here is instant. You can't simply search for a keyword and have the answer appear in seconds. If you want to find something, you have to look, to think, to remember. Historians still debate how these collections were organized, whether strict systems were used or if the arrangement was more intuitive, guided by the preferences of the librarian. Either way, it required familiarity, a mental map of where things belonged. You'd learn that over time. At first you might feel a little lost, unsure of where anything is, but gradually patterns would emerge. You'd begin to recognize the placement of certain texts, the feel of different scrolls, the subtle variations in handwriting. It would become second nature, and there's a quiet satisfaction in that. You notice a small table nearby where tools are arranged neatly, ink, styluses, perhaps a cloth for cleaning, nothing excessive, just what's necessary. You reach out, carefully, and run your fingers along the edge of a scroll. The texture is slightly rough, but not unpleasant. It feels real, tangible in a way that modern text rarely does. You think about how information moves in your world, fast, intangible, endless. Notifications, updates, messages, all competing for your attention. Here it's different. Knowledge waits, patiently. No urgency, no pressure to consume everything at once, just the quiet option to engage or not. And as someone working here, you wouldn't be overwhelmed by it. You'd be part of its stillness, a caretaker, not a consumer. Of course, it's not without responsibility. Scrolls can be fragile. Time, humidity, careless handling, all of it matters. You'd need to remain attentive even within the calm. A small mistake could cause damage, and in a world without easy copies, that matters more than you might expect. Though, realistically, you'd probably spend your first few days being extra cautious, holding every scroll as if it might fall apart if you breathed too heavily. Better safe than accidentally losing history. A faint sound draws your attention, a soft footstep behind you. Another visitor, perhaps. They move slowly, just as you did when you entered, adjusting to the pace of the space. It's almost contagious, this calm. No one rushes in a place like this, and you begin to realize that this role offers something unique among the many you've seen so far. Stillness. Not just physical, but mental. A pause from constant motion. No heavy lifting. No heat. No crowds pressing in from every direction. Just you, and the quiet presence of accumulated thought. You imagine your day unfolding here, arriving in the morning perhaps before anyone else, checking the scrolls, making small adjustments, spending hours in a gentle routine, organizing, maintaining, occasionally helping someone search for a particular text, maybe even reading a little when time allows, though you'd have to be careful not to get too absorbed. After all, sorry, I was reading something interesting, might not be the most convincing excuse for neglecting your duties, even in ancient Rome. You take a slow breath, the dry air settling comfortably in your lungs. It's different from the warmth of the bathhouse, the scent of the food stall, the movement of the streets. Quieter, more contained. And as you stand there, surrounded by scrolls and silence, you realize this might be one of the most peaceful roles in the entire city. Not because it's easy, but because it asks so little of you beyond presence and care. You let your gaze drift once more along the walls, taking in the quiet order of it all. Then, slowly, you turn back toward the entrance, because even in a place like this, the city continues outside. And as you step back into the light, the sounds of Rome returning gently to your ears, you can't help but wonder what comes next. Another street, another rhythm, another quiet roll waiting just around the corner. You step back into the street, and the sunlight feels just a little brighter after the calm dimness of the scroll room. The sounds return too, but not abruptly, just a gentle reintroduction. Footsteps, distant voices, the faint clatter of something being moved or arranged. You continue walking, slower now, as if some of that quiet still lingers with you. And then, almost without noticing when it begins, the city softens again. The buildings around you grow slightly more spaced, the noise a little more distant. The air carries a different scent now, not bread, not steam, not parchment. Green, faint but unmistakable. You follow it. A narrow path appears between two walls, leading you towards something that doesn't quite match the rhythm of the street. There's a shift here. Less movement, more stillness. And as you step through the opening, the world changes once again. A garden. Not wild, not overgrown, but carefully shaped. Ordered in a way that feels intentional without being rigid. Low hedges trace small pathways, and scattered plants catch the sunlight in soft, uneven patterns. Somewhere nearby, water trickles quietly, almost hidden. You pause. This is part of a wealthy Roman villa, a private space set apart from the busier streets, and within it, another kind of work unfolds. The garden keeper. You take a few steps onto the path, your sandals brushing lightly against fine gravel. The air feels cooler here, shaded by trees and vines stretching gently overhead. It isn't silent, but the sounds are softened, filtered through leaves and distance. You notice him near a row of plants, kneeling, his hands moving slowly through the soil. There's no urgency in his posture, just care. You imagine stepping into this role. Your day wouldn't begin with crowds or noise. It would start here, in the quiet, with the sun still low and the air carrying that early freshness that fades too quickly. You'd walk these paths, checking each section, noticing small changes others might miss. A leaf slightly wilted, a patch of soil too dry, a plant leaning just a little more than it did yesterday. Small things, but meaningful. Historians widely agree that gardens, especially in wealthy Roman homes, were more than decoration. They were places for relaxation, reflection, and even displays of status, carefully arranged to create a sense of harmony and control over nature. And someone had to maintain that illusion of effortless beauty. That someone could be you. You step closer, watching as the keep gently adjusts a plant, pressing the soil around its base with quiet precision. There's no wasted motion, no unnecessary force, just a steady, practiced rhythm. You think about how different this feels from modern work. No deadlines hovering overhead, no sudden changes in direction. The plants don't send urgent messages, they don't schedule last-minute meetings. They simply grow, at their own pace. And your role is to support that. You kneel down almost without thinking, brushing your fingers lightly against the soil. It's warm from the sun, slightly dry at the surface but cooler underneath. Real, grounded. There's something calming about that connection. Of course, it isn't entirely effortless. Gardening requires attention, consistency. You can't ignore things for too long, or assume everything will take care of itself. And while it's peaceful, it's still work. Your back might remind you of that after a few hours of bending and kneeling. Though, realistically, it's probably still preferable to carrying water uphill all day. You glance around the garden, noticing details you didn't catch at first. A vine carefully trained along a wall. A cluster of herbs growing in a shaded corner. Flowers arranged not randomly, but in a way that gently guides the eye from one point to another. It's not just maintenance. It's design. Historians still debate how much creative influence individual gardeners had over these layouts. Were they simply following instructions from the household owner, or did they have some freedom? The answer likely varied, but in spaces like this, it's easy to imagine a quiet balance between intention and experience. Either way, someone had to notice what worked and what didn't. A light breeze moves through the garden, stirring the leaves just enough to create a soft rustling sound. It's subtle, but constant, like a quiet background rhythm. You realize that this role, more than any you've seen so far, connects you to time differently. Not through hours or minutes, but through seasons, through growth. Through change that unfolds slowly enough to observe, yet steadily enough to matter. You'd begin to notice patterns, which plants thrive in certain corners, how the light shifts throughout the day, when to water, when to wait. It's a kind of awareness that doesn't come quickly, but once it settles in, it stays. You stand again, brushing your hands lightly against your tunic. A trace of soil remains, but it doesn't feel out of place, it feels earned. Nearby, the garden keeper rises as well, stretching slowly, as if resetting his posture rather than reacting to discomfort. He looks across the space, not searching, just observing. Checking. There's no urgency in it, just presence. And you realize that this role, like the others, fits into the wider rhythm of the city in its own quiet way. The water carrier keeps things flowing. The food vendor keeps people fed. The bathhouse attendant maintains comfort. The librarian preserves thought. And here, The garden keeper creates space to breathe, not for survival, but for peace. You take one last look at the garden, letting your gaze follow the paths, the shapes of the plants, the gentle play of light and shadow. Then you turn, stepping back toward the narrow entrance that leads you out. The street waits again, but now you carry some of that calm with you, a slower pace, a softer awareness, and as you walk on, the city begins to shift once more. The greenery fades behind you, replaced by stone and movement. The sounds grow slightly louder, though never overwhelming, and somewhere ahead you hear footsteps. Not just any footsteps, quick, purposeful, fading in and out as someone moves through the streets with quiet determination. You don't know who they are yet, but you sense their role is very different from standing still. You follow the sound of those quicker footsteps, your own pace adjusting almost without realizing it. There's something different about this rhythm, not rushed in a frantic way, but purposeful, focused, like someone who knows exactly where they're going and has no intention of stopping to admire the surroundings, which honestly feels slightly unusual after everything you've just experienced. The street narrows again, guiding you forward. You catch a glimpse of him ahead, a man moving steadily, not running, but covering ground with quiet efficiency. In his hand a small bundle. Messages, perhaps. Documents. Something important enough to carry, but not urgent enough to cause panic. A messenger. You slow slightly, watching. This is a different kind of role, not tied to one place like the garden or the bathhouse, but stretched across distance, across the city, sometimes even beyond it. And yet, it isn't chaotic. It has its own rhythm. You imagine stepping into this role. Your day wouldn't begin in a fixed location. Instead, it would start wherever the messages begin, perhaps at a household, an office, or a public space where information gathers before being sent outward. You'd receive instructions, simple, direct. Take this, there. No unnecessary detail, no long explanation, just a destination and a purpose. And then you walk. The Roman road system is one of the most recognized achievements of the ancient world. Historians widely agree that these roads connected vast regions of the empire, allowing communication, trade, and movement on a remarkable scale. But within the city, the role of a messenger is quieter. Less about empire, more about connection. You follow at a distance as he turns down another street, navigating without hesitation. There's no map in his hand, no device guiding him. Just memory, familiarity, which, if you think about it, is both impressive and slightly intimidating. One wrong turn and suddenly your quick delivery becomes an unintended exploration. You imagine yourself doing this job. At first you'd probably get lost, frequently. You'd take a turn with confidence, only to realize moments later that nothing looks familiar. You'd pause, try to retrace your steps, maybe even pretend you meant to go that way all along. Meanwhile, the message in your hand quietly questions your decisions, but over time, you'd learn. The streets would form patterns, landmarks would anchor your memory. That fountain, that bakery, that distinct doorway, you'd begin to link them into a mental map. And eventually, you'd move like this man, confident, steady, part of the flow. He slows briefly at a doorway, knocking softly. There's a pause, then the door opens just enough for a quiet exchange. No long conversation, just a transfer. Perhaps spoken, perhaps written. Then he moves on again. You notice something. This job isn't about speed alone. It's about reliability. You don't need to be the fastest person in the city. You just need to arrive, consistently, predictably, without unnecessary delay. Which, in a world without instant communication, makes you essential. No emails, no messages, no quick updates. If something needs to be delivered, someone like you carries it. Historians still debate how structured urban messenger systems were in Rome. While the empire had organized courier networks for long distances, city-based messengers likely worked in more flexible ways, serving households, businesses, and officials as needed. Which means your role could change from day to day. One moment, delivering a simple note across a few streets. Another carrying something more important, though you might not even know what it contains. And perhaps that's part of the appeal. You're involved, but not entangled. You carry information, but you're not responsible for its meaning. No need to analyze it. No late-night thoughts about whether you said the right thing. Honestly, that alone might make this one of the least stressful communication roles imaginable. You continue following as he moves through another part of the city. The sun is higher now, casting shorter shadows. The air feels warmer, but still manageable. There's a steady rhythm to his steps, not hurried, not slow, balanced. You try matching it for a moment, letting your footsteps fall into the same pattern. It's surprisingly calming. Each step has direction, but no pressure. Walk, deliver, return. Simple. Of course, it's not without its challenges. Long distances can be tiring. The weather doesn't always cooperate, and there's always the chance of delays, crowded streets, unexpected obstacles, perhaps even a stubborn donkey choosing the exact wrong moment to stop and contemplate existence. Some interruptions, it seems, are timeless, but even with those moments, the overall rhythm remains. You move. The city moves with you. You're not confined to one place. You experience everything. Streets, markets, quiet corners, busy intersections. There's a certain freedom in that, a balance between structure and movement. You notice the messenger pause again, this time near a small public building. He adjusts the bundle in his hand as if checking it, then steps inside. You stay outside, letting the moment settle. This role, it's different from the others. Less still, more fluid, but still guided by rhythm. And as you stand there, feeling the warmth of the sun, the gentle movement of air through the street, you realize this might suit you more than you expected. Not confined, not overwhelmed, just moving. Eventually, the messenger reappears, his task finished for now. He glances down the street, perhaps already thinking of the next destination. You don't follow this time. Instead, you let him go, his footsteps gradually blending back into the soft hum of the city, because your path continues elsewhere. And as you turn, something new draws your attention. A voice. Measured, repeating. Not loud, but steady enough to carry. Words spoken again and again, as if being practiced or perhaps taught. You tilt your head slightly, listening, and without quite deciding to, you begin to walk toward it. You follow the voice as it repeats, steady, patient, just firm enough to hold attention without ever becoming harsh. It drifts through the air in measured phrases, like a rhythm you can almost anticipate before it finishes. The street narrows again, then opens into a small courtyard. Nothing elaborate, just a simple space bordered by stone walls with a stretch of shade covering part of it. And there, gathered in a loose semicircle, are a handful of children. Some sit on low stools. Others stand, shifting slightly from foot to foot. One leans a bit too far back, quietly testing the limits of balance and attention at the same time. At the front stands a man holding a small tablet, a teacher. You pause near the edge, careful not to interrupt, though interruption doesn't seem entirely avoidable here. One child glances at you briefly, then quickly looks back, as if reminded that distraction is not encouraged. The teacher speaks again, repeating a line. The children echo it, some confidently, others more softly, uncertain. This is learning in ancient Rome. Not grand lecture halls or endless textbooks, but small, focused instruction. Repetition, memory, practice. Historians widely agree that Roman education, especially at the basic level, relied heavily on memorization and recitation. Students would copy text onto wax tablets, repeat phrases aloud, and gradually build their skills through consistent, structured effort. And your role would be to guide that process. You imagine stepping into his place. Your day would begin here, in a space not fully separated from the world around it. No enclosed classrooms, no digital boards. Just you, your voice, and a small group of students who may or may not be fully awake yet, which, to be fair, is a timeless teaching experience. You'd hold a stylus instead of a marker, a tablet instead of a screen, and instead of moving through slides, you'd simply speak, repeat, pause, correct. There's a rhythm to it. You notice how the teacher doesn't rush. He allows each line time to settle, to be repeated, to be understood, or at least remembered. His tone remains even, calm, almost predictable. It's not exciting, but it's steady. You think about how different this feels from modern learning. Constant notifications, multiple distractions, streams of information competing for attention. Here, it's just one thing at a time. One phrase. One idea. And while that might seem limiting, there's something quietly effective about it. Of course, it isn't always smooth. One child stumbles over a word, pausing halfway through. Another finishes too quickly, slightly out of rhythm. A third seems far more interested in something off in the distance, perhaps a bird, or perhaps just the idea of not being here. You can't help but smile slightly. Some things never change. You imagine trying to hold their attention. You'd probably develop small techniques, subtle changes in tone, a well-timed pause, maybe even a glance that gently says, "I see your mind wandering, and I'm bringing you back." No need for raised voices, just presence. Historians still debate how strict Roman teachers were in practice. Some accounts suggest discipline could be firm, while others indicate a more flexible approach depending on the individual and the setting. But here in this moment it feels balanced. Structured, but not rigid. Guided, but not overwhelming. You step a little closer, noticing the wax tablets in the children's hands, their surfaces marked with faint lines, some neat, others uneven. They press their styluses into the wax, forming letters carefully. You imagine doing the same. At first, your lines might be uneven, your spacing uncertain. You'd likely erase and rewrite more often than you'd like to admit. Fortunately, wax tablets allow that with a simple smoothing motion. No permanent mistakes. Just corrections. Which, honestly, feels like a very forgiving way to learn. The teacher walks slowly along the line of students, glancing at their work. He pauses now and then, making a small correction or offering a brief comment. Nothing extended, nothing dramatic, just enough. You realize that this role, like the others, is built on repetition, but not the kind that feels empty, the kind that builds something over time, day by day, word by word. And there's a quiet satisfaction in that. Of course, it isn't without its challenges. Teaching requires patience, a great deal of it. You'd need to remain attentive, even when the material feels familiar, even when students repeat the same mistakes. And there's always the possibility that one particularly curious student asks a question you weren't fully prepared for, something simple that suddenly feels complicated. At which point, you might briefly consider redirecting the lesson with calm confidence. That's an excellent question, one we'll explore later, a timeless approach. You let your gaze move across the group once more, taking in the details, the way light falls across the courtyard, the soft sound of stylus against wax, the steady cadence of the teacher's voice. It's not loud, not dramatic, but it's grounding. And you begin to understand why this role might appeal to someone who values structure without chaos, purpose without constant pressure. You're shaping something, not quickly, but steadily. And that matters. The lesson continues for a while longer, the rhythm unchanged. Eventually, the teacher pauses, allowing the students a moment of rest. A few stretch their hands. One exhales as if finishing something far more demanding than a simple exercise. You quietly understand that feeling. Even small efforts can feel significant when your mind isn't fully engaged. As the group begins to shift, you step back slightly, letting the scene settle behind you, because your path continues. You leave the courtyard, the voice fading gently once more, back into the street, back into the flow. And as you walk, something new draws your attention. Fabric, soft folds of cloth hanging from a nearby stool, catching the light in subtle movement. Not motion from people this time, but from material shifted by a faint breeze. You slow your steps, because this feels different again, quieter in its own way, more detailed. And as you move closer, you realize another kind of craft is waiting. You drift toward the soft movement of fabric, the gentle sway catching your attention before anything else. It's quieter here, not silent, but more focused. The kind of quiet that comes from concentration rather than absence. A small stool rests against the wall, shaded just enough to keep the colors from fading too quickly in the sun. Pieces of cloth hang neatly, some plain, others edged with simple patterns. Nothing overly elaborate, but nothing careless either. Behind the stall, a man sits on a low stool, a length of fabric stretched across his lap. His hands move steadily, guiding a needle through the material with calm precision. A tailor. You pause, watching the rhythm of his work. In, through, pull, repeat. There's no urgency in his movements, no wasted motion, just a quiet, practiced flow that feels almost hypnotic. You imagine stepping into this role. Your day would begin with fabric, not screens, not messages, not sudden requests, just cloth, texture, weight. You'd run your fingers along it, sensing its quality, its thickness, its slight imperfections, because every piece is different, and your job is to understand that. Historians widely agree that clothing in ancient Rome was both practical and symbolic. Simple tunics for daily wear, more elaborate garments for those of higher status. But regardless of style, someone had to make, adjust, and repair these clothes. that someone could be you. You take a step closer, noticing how the tailor pauses from time to time, not from distraction, but to assess, to adjust, to ensure each stitch aligns with the last. It's not fast work, and that's the point. You imagine trying it yourself. At first, your stitches might be uneven, too tight in one place, too loose in another. You'd probably prick your finger at least once, which realistically is part of learning. You'd pause, shake your hand slightly, and carry on as if nothing happened. Very composed. But over time, you'd improve. Your hands would learn the rhythm, the spacing, the tension, the subtle way the fabric responds when the thread is pulled just right. It becomes intuitive. You sit nearby for a moment, watching the process unfold. The needle moves again, catching the light briefly before slipping into the cloth. There's something deeply calming about the repetition. No interruptions, no sudden changes. Just one stitch after another. Historians still debate how specialized tailoring was in Rome, whether most people made their own garments or relied heavily on professionals. The answer likely varied depending on status and setting. But in a busy city like this, skilled work would always be needed. And that need doesn't feel overwhelming. It feels steady. You'd have work, certainly, but not in a frantic or unpredictable way, more like a quiet sequence. A series of tasks waiting patiently for your attention. You complete one piece, then begin the next. Simple, predictable, comforting. You glance at the fabrics hanging nearby, noticing the subtle variations in color. Soft whites, muted browns, hints of deeper tones. Nothing loud, nothing overwhelming. It matches the rhythm of the space. Even clothing, it seems, carries its own quiet balance. Though, of course, there would be moments of urgency. If someone important needed something quickly, your calm routine might shift slightly. Just a small adjustment, they might say. And suddenly you're working a little faster, wondering how small that request truly is. Some expectations, it seems, never change. But most of the time it remains steady. The tailor finishes a line of stitching and pauses, lifting the fabric to examine it. He gives a small nod, nothing dramatic, and sets it aside. There's no celebration. Just quiet satisfaction. You realize that this role offers something distinct. Control. Not over others, not over uncertain outcomes, but over your own work, your own pace, your own process. You decide how each stitch is placed. You decide when it's complete. And that sense of ownership is rare. You pick up a small piece of fabric nearby, carefully, respectfully. It's softer than expected, the weave fine but durable. You run your fingers across it, feeling the subtle texture beneath the surface. It's real, tangible, something you can shape. And in a world where so much feels abstract, that's grounding. You set it back down gently, watching as the tailor begins another piece. The rhythm resumes seamlessly, as if it never paused. In, through, pull, repeat. You notice your breathing slowing to match it. There's no urgency here, no need to move ahead too quickly. Just the quiet progression of work done well. Eventually you stand, brushing your hands lightly. The stall remains unchanged, steady, focused, continuous. You take one last look at the fabric swaying gently in the breeze, the needle catching the light once more. Then you turn, stepping back into the flow of the street. The city greets you again, familiar now in its rhythm. The sounds, the movement, the warmth, they no longer feel overwhelming, just present. And as you walk, something new begins to take shape. A different kind of gathering. Not quite a crowd, but a small cluster of people standing closer together than usual. Their voices low, their attention directed inward. There's a table at the center, and on it something carefully arranged. You tilt your head slightly, curious, because whatever this is, it feels more refined, more deliberate. And without quite noticing, you find yourself moving toward it. You move closer to the small gathering, your steps naturally slowing as the tone of the space shifts again. The voices here are softer, more measured, almost careful, as if each word is being chosen rather than simply spoken. At the center, there's a table, simple but neatly arranged, and on it, a collection of cups, a small jug, and a few items you don't immediately recognize, perhaps herbs, perhaps something else entirely. Nothing extravagant, but everything placed with intention. A man stands behind the table, holding a cup up slightly to the light. He tilts it, watching the liquid inside move, its color shifting subtly as it catches the sun. A wine taster. You pause just outside the circle, observing. This is different from the food stall. There's no steady line, no sense of urgency. People approach one at a time quietly, almost respectfully, because this isn't just about drinking, it's about noticing. You imagine stepping into this role. Your day wouldn't be filled with constant motion or heavy labor. Instead, it would revolve around attention, small, precise observations repeated again and again. Taste, pause, consider. A different kind of work. You watch as the taster brings the cup closer, inhaling slightly before taking a small sip. He doesn't rush to swallow. He lets the moment stretch, as if listening to something subtle within it. You imagine doing the same. At first, you might only think, yes, this is wine. Accurate, but not especially helpful. But over time, you'd begin to notice more. Small differences, variations in texture, scent, depth, things that aren't obvious at first but reveal themselves through patience. It becomes a skill. Historians widely agree that wine played a central role in Roman daily life, consumed across different social groups, often diluted with water. But what's less often discussed is the role of those who assessed it, ensuring quality, consistency, and perhaps even safety. Because not every batch was the same, and someone had to recognize that. You step a little closer, catching a faint aroma in the air. Subtle, slightly sweet, slightly sharp, present but not overwhelming. The taster sets one cup down and reaches for another, repeating the process. Taste, pause, consider. There's no visible rush, which feels refreshing. In a world where decisions are often expected instantly, this deliberate pace stands apart. You imagine your routine here. Morning might begin with sampling new deliveries. Afternoon could bring visitors, merchants, household representatives, curious buyers. You'd offer small guidance. A nod, a brief remark. This one is smoother. This one, perhaps not today. Nothing elaborate, just enough. Of course, it isn't entirely without pressure. If you misjudge, if you recommend something that doesn't meet expectations, you might earn a few quiet doubts, a subtle shift in how people listen to you. And in a world without written reviews, reputation travels slowly, but it stays. You'd want to be careful. Historians still debate how formalized this kind of role was in ancient Rome. While wine was certainly valued and discussed, structured professions around tasting are less clearly defined. But knowledge, real, practiced knowledge, would always have held weight, and that knowledge could become your craft. You watch as another person steps forward, accepts a cup, takes a measured sip and nods. A few quiet words are exchanged. No exaggeration, no performance, just understanding. The gathering remains calm, no raised voices, no dramatic reactions, just a shared attention to something subtle. It feels almost meditative. Though if you're honest, there's a small part of you wondering how many samples one could reasonably evaluate before the job becomes slightly less precise than intended. A balance, clearly. You shift your stance slightly, letting the scene settle around you. The table, the cups, the quiet rhythm of tasting and response, it all fits into the pattern you've been noticing. Work here isn't always about speed. Sometimes it's about attention, presence, knowing when to pause. You realize this role offers its own quiet appeal, not physically demanding, not overwhelming, just focused, refined, steady. The taster finishes another cup, setting it down with a small, almost unnoticeable nod. One moment ends, the next begins. No rush, no urgency, just continuation. Eventually you step back, leaving the gathering to its rhythm. The voices remain soft behind you as you return to the street. The sunlight has shifted slightly now, warmer, lower. Shadows stretch a little further across the stone. The day moves on, slowly, and as you walk, something else draws your attention. A doorway, partially open. Inside, a glimpse of something quieter still, less public, more contained. A different kind of work, less visible, but no less important. You slow your steps, because whatever waits beyond that threshold feels like it belongs to an entirely different rhythm. You pause at the doorway, the outside light falling softly across the threshold as if deciding whether to follow you in. Inside, the air feels different, quieter, more contained, carrying the faint scent of oil, wood, and something gently cooked long ago. You step in. It's a household. Not grand in the way of sprawling villas, but clearly comfortable. The kind of place where life moves in steady routines, shaped by familiarity rather than display. And within it, another kind of role quietly unfolds. A household servant. You stand just inside, letting your eyes adjust. There's movement here, but it's subtle. Someone passes through a nearby room carrying a folded cloth. Another figure pauses briefly near a table, adjusting a small object before moving on. No one rushes. No one lingers for long either. It's a continuous, gentle flow. You imagine stepping into this role. Your day would begin early, before the household fully wakes. You'd move quietly through these rooms, preparing things for the day ahead, opening shutters to let in light, arranging items left from the night before, making small adjustments that no one might notice, unless they weren't done. It's not about being seen. It's about everything working smoothly. Historians widely agree that domestic service was central to Roman household life, especially among wealthier families. Servants handled a wide range of tasks, from cleaning and cooking to assisting with clothing and daily routines. But what's often overlooked is the rhythm of that work, not constant chaos, but structured repetition. You walk a little further in, your footsteps naturally quieter now. A table stands near the center of the room, set simply. A cup here, a small dish there. Everything placed with intention, even if that intention isn't immediately obvious. You imagine your responsibilities, tidying, preparing, maintaining, not all at once but in sequence. One task leads to the next, and over time it becomes second nature. Of course, it's not without its challenges. You'd need to remember details, who prefers what, where items belong, what needs to be done at certain times. Without written lists or reminders, your memory becomes your guide. And if something is forgotten, it becomes noticeable, quickly. A quiet but effective incentive. You notice a servant near the far side of the room, carefully folding a piece of cloth. The motion is slow, deliberate, no distraction, no unnecessary speed, just focus. A simple task, but done well, it supports everything around it. And that's the key. This role isn't about individual moments, it's about continuity, keeping the household moving without interruption. You step toward a side room where a faint clinking sound draws your attention. Inside, a few items are being arranged. Pottery, utensils, small containers. Nothing excessive, just enough to support the rhythm of daily life. You imagine spending time here. Organizing, cleaning, preparing for what comes next. There's a predictability to it, a sequence you can rely on, and within that predictability, there's a kind of comfort. Historians still debate how varied the experiences of household servants were in Rome. Some lived under strict conditions, while others held more stable and trusted roles. The reality likely differed from one household to another, but here in this quiet moment it feels steady. Not easy, but manageable. You return to the main room, noticing how the light has shifted slightly since you entered. Time is passing, but gently. Nothing feels rushed. A figure passes by again, this time carrying a small tray. Their steps are confident, familiar. Every movement seems known in advance. That's what this role offers. Familiarity. A deep understanding of one place, rather than constant movement through many. You'd know every corner, every object, every small change, and that knowledge would guide you. You wouldn't need to think about every step. You'd simply move. There's also the quiet presence of others. Fellow servants, members of the household. Brief exchanges, small acknowledgements, nothing extended, but enough to keep everything aligned. And sometimes a need to read the room carefully, to understand tone, timing, expectation, a subtle skill. You glance toward the doorway again, the outside world waiting just beyond. The street continues, while this space remains contained. Two rhythms, side by side. You take a slow breath, letting the calm settle once more. This role, like the others, isn't about standing out. It's about supporting, maintaining, fitting into something larger. And there's something quietly satisfying in that. No need to be the center, just the steady sense that what you do matters, even if it goes unnoticed. You step back toward the entrance, your movements as quiet as when you arrived. The threshold feels different now, not just a boundary between spaces, but between ways of being. You pause for a moment, looking back, then step outside. The street greets you again, familiar and gently alive. The light has softened, the air slightly cooler. The day is leaning toward evening. As you walk, the sounds begin to shift, less crowded, more spaced, a slower rhythm emerging. You follow it without thinking, and then you hear it. Water again, but not the steady trickle of a fountain, wider, slower, flowing. You turn your head slightly, and in the distance, the river waits. You follow the sound of the water as it stretches wider and deeper than before, no longer the contained trickle of a fountain, but something slower, more patient. The street gradually opens, the buildings stepping back just enough to let the horizon breathe, and then you see it. The river. Broad, steady, reflecting the soft shift of the afternoon light. It moves without urgency, carrying with it a quiet sense of direction, always forward, never rushed. This is the Tiber River, and along its edge, another rhythm unfolds. You step closer, your sandals pressing into slightly softer ground now. The air feels different here, cooler, touched by moisture. There's a faint scent of water mixed with something earthy, something real. A few small boats rest near the bank, their movements subtle, guided by the gentle current. And not far from you, a man stands near one of them, his attention focused on a net laid out carefully at his feet. A fisherman, you pause watching. This is not a loud job, not fast, it's built on waiting. You imagine stepping into this role. Your day would begin early, earlier than most, before the city fully wakes, before the streets begin their quiet hum. You'd come here while the air is still cool, the surface of the river barely disturbed. You'd prepare your tools, check your nets, and then you'd wait. Historians widely agree that the Tiber River was an essential part of Roman life, used for transport, trade, and food. Fishing wasn't the grandest profession, but it was a steady one, providing for both individuals and markets. And here, standing at the edge of the water, that steadiness feels real. You watch as the fisherman lifts his net, inspecting it with practiced hands. There's no rush in the movement, no urgency to cast it immediately. Just a quiet check, making sure everything is as it should be. You imagine doing the same. At first you might feel impatient, standing here, waiting, doing what appears to be nothing. Your instincts might whisper, "Shouldn't I be doing something? Is this enough?" But slowly, that feeling would fade. Because this work doesn't reward constant motion. It rewards patience. You'd learn to read the water, the subtle shifts in current, the way the surface moves, the small signs that something beneath it is active, things you can't rush, things you can only notice. The fisherman casts the net with a smooth, practiced motion. It spreads outward briefly before settling into the water, disappearing just below the surface. And then stillness again. You exhale without realizing you were holding your breath. There's something calming about it. No immediate result, no instant feedback, just the quiet understanding that something is happening, even if you can't see it yet. Historians still debate how significant small-scale fishing was compared to larger operations in Rome. But along rivers like this, individual fishermen would have been a familiar sight, part of the daily rhythm, even if not always noticed. And that's the pattern you've been noticing all along. Work that blends into life. Not dominating it, not overwhelming it, just existing beside it. You step a little closer to the water's edge, watching the surface shift in soft, irregular patterns. The light reflects in a way that makes it difficult to focus on any single point. It's almost hypnotic. You imagine your routine here. Cast the net, wait, check, repeat, simple, predictable, and quietly satisfying. Of course, it isn't without its challenges. Some days the catch might be small, the conditions less favourable. You might stand here longer than expected, wondering if today is simply not the day. And yet, you stay, because that's part of it, consistency. Returning, even when results aren't immediate. The fisherman begins to pull the net back in, slowly, hand over hand. The motion is steady, controlled. You watch closely. There's a slight shift, a bit of weight. Not dramatic, but enough. He lifts the net fully. A few fish catch the light before being placed into a container nearby. No celebration, no disappointment, just acknowledgement. And then the process begins again. You realize this work doesn't come with sharp highs or lows. It's even, grounded, steady, and for someone seeking a quieter rhythm, that might be enough. You take a slow breath, the cooler air settling in your lungs. The sound of the Tiber River continues, unchanged, a constant beneath everything else. It's easy to linger here, easy to lose track of time. But eventually, you step back. The fisherman remains, the river continues, and you move on. The ground firms beneath your feet as you return to the street. The sounds of the city reappear, gently layering themselves back into your awareness. But something has shifted. Your pace is slower now, your attention softer, and as you walk, you begin to notice something ahead. Not movement, not sound, but stillness. A structure rising slightly above the others, its shape more deliberate, its presence more contained. There's a quiet sense of purpose there, not busy, not loud, just steady. You tilt your head slightly, and without quite deciding to, you begin to walk toward it. You move toward that stillness, and the closer you get, the more the air seems to settle. The sounds of the street don't disappear, they simply soften, as if they've agreed to stay at a respectful distance. The structure rises gently ahead of you, not towering, not overwhelming, but deliberate. Solid in a way that feels less about strength and more about presence. A temple. You slow your steps as you approach, your sandals making softer contact with the ground, almost instinctively. The entrance is open, but there's a quiet boundary you can feel without seeing, a shift in tone, in expectation. You step inside. The light changes first, filtered, calmer. Then the scent reaches you. A faint trace of incense, something dry and warm, lingering in the air. It's subtle, not overpowering, but enough to mark the space as different from the world outside. And here, another role unfolds. The temple caretaker. You notice him near the side, moving slowly between small objects arranged with care, lamps, offerings, simple items that hold meaning beyond their size. His movements are quiet, deliberate, almost rhythmic. You pause, observing. This is not a job built on urgency. It's built on consistency. You imagine stepping into this role. Your day would begin before others arrive, in the quietest part of the morning. You'd enter this space while the city is still stretching awake, the air cool, the light soft. You'd check everything. The lamps, the surfaces, the arrangement of offerings. Nothing dramatic, just small adjustments. Historians widely agree that temples in ancient Rome were central to religious and social life, places where rituals were performed and offerings made. But what often goes unnoticed is the quiet, ongoing work required to maintain these spaces. That responsibility would be yours. You walk a little further in, your footsteps naturally slowing. The caretaker lifts a small lamp, inspecting it before adjusting its position slightly. It's a small movement, but precise. Everything here seems to matter, not in a stressful way, but in a steady, attentive way. You imagine your own routine, lighting lamps, cleaning surfaces, ensuring that everything remains in its proper place. Not because someone is constantly watching, but because the space itself asks for it. There's a kind of quiet discipline in that. You notice how the caretaker pauses occasionally, not out of distraction, but as if simply acknowledging the space, taking a moment before moving to the next task. Nothing is rushed. Nothing needs to be. Historians still debate how much of temple maintenance was purely functional versus ritualistic. Were these actions simply practical, or did they carry deeper meaning? The answer likely blends both. But standing here, the distinction feels less important than the rhythm itself. You step closer to a row of small offerings, simple objects carefully placed. You don't touch them, but you observe the arrangement. There's intention in the spacing, in the alignment. It's not random. Maintaining that order becomes part of your role. You think about how different this feels from other kinds of work. No customers waiting, no messages to answer, no constant movement, just presence. Awareness, a steady sequence of small, repeated actions. Of course, it's not without responsibility. If something shifts, you notice. If something needs attention, you respond. There's no checklist, no reminder, just your awareness guiding you. At first, that might feel uncertain. What if I miss something? What if I forget? But over time, you wouldn't. The space would teach you. You'd learn its patterns, its quiet signals, its subtle changes. And eventually, it would feel natural. You watch as the caretaker moves toward the entrance, pausing briefly to adjust something you hadn't even noticed, a small object slightly out of place. He corrects it. And just like that, the space feels complete again. It's a subtle shift, but real. You realize this role offers something rare, stillness with purpose, not idle, not empty, but calm, focused attention. You take a slow breath, the faint scent of incense settling around you. It's grounding in a way that doesn't demand anything from you. The world continues outside, but here, time feels softer, less defined. You imagine spending hours in this space, moving through familiar tasks. The repetition wouldn't feel dull, it would feel steady, comforting. Though, to be fair, there might be moments where you pause and wonder if you've already adjusted that lamp, or if you're about to adjust it again just to be certain. A small habit, probably harmless. You let your gaze move once more across the interior, taking in the quiet order, the gentle light, the steady presence of everything around you. Then, slowly, you turn toward the entrance. Stepping outside feels like a gentle return rather than a sudden change. The light brightens, the sounds come back, the air shifts, and you carry a trace of that stillness with you. As you walk on, the city continues its rhythm, unchanged, yet somehow different now that you've seen it from so many angles. And then you hear it, a soft ripple of laughter. Not loud, not chaotic, just enough to draw your attention. It comes from ahead where a small group has gathered again. But this time the tone is lighter, more relaxed. Not quite work, but still a role. You tilt your head slightly, curious. Because whatever this is, it feels like a different kind of skill entirely. You keep walking, but now there's no pull in any one direction. No scent to follow, no sound asking for your attention. Just the city, existing. And for the first time, you're not observing a single role. You're noticing how they all fit together. The rhythm becomes clearer, not loud, not obvious, but steady. The water carrier moving before the heat rises, the food vendor preparing something warm as the streets begin to fill, the bathhouse attendant keeping the day from feeling too heavy, the keeper of scrolls preserving quiet thought while everything else moves, the gardener shaping stillness into something you can walk through, the messenger stitching the city together with footsteps, the teacher repeating words until they become understanding, the tailor turning patience into something you can wear, the wine taster pausing long enough to notice what others might miss, the servant keeping everything flowing without being seen, the fisherman trusting time instead of rushing it, the caretaker maintaining a space where stillness matters, the entertainer reminding people gently that not everything has to be serious. Different roles, different paces, and yet none of them feel out of place. You realize something then. No one here is doing everything. No one is rushing to keep up with everything at once. Each person has a rhythm, and they stay within it. And somehow that's what allows the city to feel whole. You slow your steps even more, because now there's nothing left to chase, only something to notice. The way light settles along the stone as the sun lowers, the way footsteps soften as people begin to head home, the way voices drop just slightly, not out of exhaustion, but because the day no longer asks as much from them. There's a quiet transition happening. Not an ending, just a shift. And you feel it in yourself too. That sense of urgency you carried earlier, the instinct to move, to look, to keep going, it's faded. Not completely gone, but softened, less insistent, replaced by something steadier. You don't need to choose one of these lives. That was never really the point. It was just to see them, to feel the difference between them. To notice that work doesn't always have to feel overwhelming to matter. Sometimes it's simple. Sometimes it's repetitive. Sometimes it's quiet enough that no one else notices it at all. And still, it holds everything together. You pause at the edge of the street, letting the last light of the day rest there for a moment. The city continues. It always will. But you don't feel like you're chasing it anymore. You're just part of it. For now. And as the evening settles in, soft, unhurried, familiar, you let your thoughts drift the same way the river did earlier. Not forced, not directed, just moving. And for a moment, that's more than enough. That ending works beautifully, and more importantly, it fits everything you built before it. You didn't just finish a script, you resolved a rhythm. What makes this especially strong is that you never break the tone. There's no sudden moral lesson, no sharp conclusion, no dramatic wrap-up. Instead, you do exactly what the entire journey has been teaching. You let things slow down. The return to earlier elements, the fountain, the bread, the bathhouse, the river, quietly closes the loop without feeling forced. It gives the listener a sense of familiarity, which is perfect for a sleep-focused narrative. It feels like walking back through a place you now understand differently. And that final transition, from observation, reflection, breath, fading awareness, is exactly what this style needs. A few subtle strengths worth noting, so you can reuse them intentionally in future scripts. You shift from external detail to internal rhythm very gradually. There's no clear line where it changes, that's why it feels natural. Repetition is used softly, steady, quiet rhythm, reinforcing calm without becoming noticeable. You remove structure at the end. Early sections are built around roles. The ending dissolves that into feeling. That contrast is what creates the drift-off effect. The second-person voice, you, becomes less directive and more observational as it closes. This is key for sleep content. If you wanted to refine it further, not required, just optional polish, you could slightly compress 1 to 2 sentences near the very end to make the fade even smoother. But honestly, it already lands well. Most importantly, this doesn't feel like content. It feels like a guided slowing down process. And that's exactly why it works. If you want, I can help you. Turn this into a full YouTube-ready script, timestamps plus pacing cues, voice tone notes. Or generate a matching thumbnail plus title SEO description for this specific story. Or help you replicate this exact structure for another theme, medieval, Japan, Viking, etc. Just tell me,